Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going. As I like to point out each and every day, it expands our base. We have a lot to talk about this morning, but I want to begin with an ominous note. 4 years ago today, the war between Russia and Ukraine began. Now, I want to be very clear about this. This was not a war started by Ukraine. Let's be clear. Despite Donald Trump's words saying that this war was started by the Ukrainians, in fact, the war was started by Russia. And let's be equally clear that it really was a war started by Vladimir Putin. Putin has in his mind the recreation of the old Soviet Empire, or if you will, the Russian Empire. And you can't have that empire without Ukraine. Now, the fact that many of those who were part of the Soviet Empire are now independent nations and don't want to be part of a newly reconstructed Soviet Union seems not to matter to Vladimir Putin. And so a war grinds on. And let's be clear about that as well. More than 1 million people, some guesstimate as many as 2 million people, Russians and Ukrainians, have died. This is the bloodiest conflict on the continent of Europe since the Second World War. And is there a winner? The answer is no. The Ukrainians, valiantly resisting the Soviet aggression, are unable to repel the Russian army from its territory. 20%, roughly, of what is today Ukrainian territory is occupied by Russia. And the only way to end this conflict, really and truly, is for Russia to withdraw, for Ukraine to be able to have the very integrity that it has been guaranteed. And let's point out that in 1995, there was an agreement signed by Russia, the United States, and Great Britain, and Ukraine, guaranteeing Ukrainian independence. And in return for this agreement, the Budapest Agreement, Ukraine gave up its nuclear arsenal, the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world. And the guarantee was that the territorial integrity of Ukraine would be protected, and more than that, that if, in fact, Russia moved aggressively against Ukraine, that the Allies would step in and help to preserve the integrity of Ukraine as an independent nation. We know that that did not happen. And we've talked about the fact that it didn't happen because of the threat of a nuclear conflagration. That's right. The Russians have said they would even use a nuclear weapon to preserve what they're doing. But the Ukrainians, they're defenseless. They have no nuclear arms. And Russia feels that it can do what it will. Now, despite the fact that there is almost universal condemnation of what has happened, the Ukrainians have not received the help that they need. And so where do we stand today? A standoff. Except Russia has vast resources, and they can, the Russians, given their military fitness, can go on and on, even if they lose men, even if they lose supplies, even if they lose, frankly, the PR battle. The Ukrainians are determined to preserve their independence. I will never forget speaking many years ago at Colorado College, and on the faculty there was a gentleman, a professor, who was a valiant defender of Ukraine, who said, one day Ukraine will be free. And of course, what happened was that Russia continued to dominate until the collapse of the Soviet Union. And then when Ukraine finally was given its independence, finally by treaty, it agreed to certain conditions with the support of the Allies. Well, we know what happened. No one was willing to leap to the defense of Ukraine out of fear of Putin. And this may be one of the most important lessons of all. The lesson is that one man who rules with absolute power can make a huge difference. Without Putin, there would have been no war. Without Putin, there can be no peace. And so this battle between Ukraine and Russia remains fixed, and there seems no way, after 4 years of combat, to really determine what to do next. My own solution: let Russia go back to its borders, let Ukraine have its territorial integrity, and that's the answer. But that's not what is happening. Every day, Russia makes small gains, a mile here, a mile there. But in the end, the valiant resistance by the people of Ukraine continues. And it is one of the great struggles for human freedom in our history, the history of the world. We'll continue to talk about Ukraine as events unfold. But let's be clear, the Ukrainians are in a battle for their survival. Putin is in a battle to recreate the Russian Empire. And we'll see how it all sorts itself out. But we will see the importance of personality demonstrated tonight as well in Donald Trump's State of the Union speech, his first State of the Union speech in his second term. Now, here's the question that I have for tonight. 1, will President Trump acknowledge the Ukrainian struggle? It is the 4th anniversary. Will it be part of his speech? Will he, as he has in the past, blame the Ukrainians? Or will he concede that Russia is the real obstacle? We must also look carefully at what he will say about the tariff question. Remember that this last week, following his defeat in the Supreme Court, Donald Trump unleashed an attack on the court itself. It was a vicious attack, and it goes to the very heart of the question of whether we have two co-equal branches and a third, the legislative branch, which does nothing, which is just sitting back. But the battle between the Supreme Court and this president is now joined. And although the president was able to pick up 3 votes on the court, it is clear that the majority, 6-3, opposed the tariff bill. Now, what did the president proclaim before the decision came down? He said one way or the other he would get around it. He would find provisions in law which would allow him to impose tariffs. And so he's declared a worldwide tariff, which he thought would be at 10%. He's now upped it to 15%. He has 150 days. If Congress does not renew that bill, well, the tariff question is gone. But for Donald Trump, it's a very, very serious question, because the tariffs, and he said, remember, that he loves tariffs more than any other word in the English language, that without tariffs, Donald Trump's whole economic forecasts are in big trouble. And so now we wait to see, following the court decision, will the federal government be required to return money that has been taken because of tariffs? Will the president, who has already spent billions of that money to subsidize American farmers, if this is illegal, how will that money be restored? And if the whole premise of Donald Trump's economic revival is based on tariffs, what happens next? Oh, I forgot to mention the allies, those who we have worked with closely, who also have tariffs. What are they going to do? Are they going to support Donald Trump, oppose Donald Trump, pay the tariff, refuse to pay the tariff? There are real questions now about Donald Trump and his respect for law. When the President of the United States defies the Supreme Court, saying he'll simply find another way to do it, all of us should be concerned. I am reminded that if Richard Nixon had pulled the same stunt in the case of the United States versus Richard Nixon, we would have entered a constitutional crisis beyond comprehension. But because in the Nixon case, it was 8-0 with one justice, William Rehnquist, recusing himself, the president really had no choice. But there's also another difference. Richard Nixon understood the Constitution. He respected the Constitution. He may have done things which were not right, but in the end, he did what was right. Donald Trump seems to have no respect for law, for the Supreme Court, even for the legislative branch of government. I want to make this comment as well. You have noticed the deafening silence from the Congress, a Congress controlled by Republicans, both the House and Senate. If these occurrences had taken place under a Democratic administration, you can be sure the Republicans would have been up in arms. They would have accused the president of violating the Constitution, of violating the separation of powers, of abusing power. There is no doubt in my mind that the difference today is the fact that the Republicans are afraid of Donald Trump. And even those Republicans who are willing to speak out are faced with the threat of a primary challenge or worse. We know that the president has mobilized the Department of Justice, that he goes after people out of revenge who disagree with him. We have seen him go into a state like Indiana, where his redistricting plan was not approved, and say, okay, I'm going to primary those members of the Indiana legislature who opposed me. That's the kind of petty politics that we are now seeing being played out by Donald Trump. There is another question about tonight. Will Donald Trump attack the Supreme Court? Remember that the justices of the United States Supreme Court are invited by the Congress to witness the State of the Union. Now, let me remind you that the State of the Union was not traditionally delivered in person. The change came in Woodrow Wilson's administration, his first State of the Union, when Woodrow Wilson chose to appear before Congress. And so he did in 1913. He spoke directly to the members of the House and Senate. He said, if I am required to give an annual report, I'm going to do it in person. Now, we are told tonight that the president will speak for a long period of time. This should be a longer State of the Union. And we will be listening avidly to see what else the president says. He certainly has to talk about the economy. He has to talk about the nature of the balance of powers. I believe these things are clear. Now, what will Donald Trump do? Nobody knows. And remember, the State of the Union is the president's opportunity to state to the nation his perceptions, and you can be certain that Donald Trump will enumerate all of the areas in which he believes America is better off than it was a year ago. So tonight, beginning at 6 o'clock Pacific time, I will be listening carefully to every word that Donald Trump utters. And our podcast tomorrow will most assuredly be a discussion of this president and his presentation. He is center stage, and the American people are listening. The question of tariffs, the question of foreign policy, the question of Ukraine, the question of many of the issues which Donald Trump has raised will be discussed. He will have his opportunity to make his case, and all of us will listen respectfully, and then tomorrow we will do what we traditionally do here in the United States of America. We pick it apart. We say what we agree with. We say what we disagree with. That is the whole point of American democracy. And we will listen carefully to what the Republicans and the Democrats who will witness the State of the Union have to say. One last point. There is some talk by some Democrats of boycotting the State of the Union speech. Nonsense. You should be present in your seats so that when you respond You can do it on a first-hand basis. The idea of a boycott makes no sense to me, because what you're doing really is saying to this president you don't care what he thinks. And it may be that you don't agree with him, that you don't care what he thinks, but he is the President of the United States, and you have to listen carefully and respond effectively when a president speaks. So tonight, all of us have the same homework assignment. We will be listening to the President's State of the Union. We'll be watching the events of the day as they unfold. This truly will be a dramatic day in the history of American politics. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. You can write me a review on Apple Podcasts, drop a comment on YouTube or Spotify, and click any of the links in the show notes to connect with me on social media. Let me remind you that on Friday, I will take your questions. Make sure you have your name and your question. Our wonderful producer, Gogo Zoger, will go over everything, and I will get them, and boy, are we going to have an interesting session. Please remember to share this episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand, which, of course, is our goal. This show has been getting such positive attention that we're excited to bring on the advertising support that you hear at the beginning and the end of this podcast. This helps us to create more opportunities for Around the Political World, and we're happy to share some of this good news with you. To Gogo Zoger, the wonderful producer of this podcast, I want to express my sincere appreciation. We will be back tomorrow with more on Around the Political World with John Rothman. See you then.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.